Great. So, thanks for coming, everyone. Nice to be with everyone tonight. And I mentioned we have a few folks out at Kamagon's Retreat Center joining in tonight. That's nice. Northfield Buddhist Center, a place I've been teaching for probably more than 20 years, invited me to give a talk on this coming Thursday on ease and freedom in these uncertain times. So I thought I'd try it out tonight, this reflection, and hopefully with our discussion, just, what does it look like given, I think we want to have some humility that maybe these times aren't any more uncertain than any other times. It's kind of an arrogant sense that we just happen to be living in the most uncertain or difficult times. And that's probably a bit of an affront to history. But it's maybe, that doesn't mean it's not an uncertain time or not a difficult time, or that there isn't a lot of suffering, or there isn't a lot of ignorance and activity of greed and aversion, hatred and fear that causes so much suffering. Clearly that's the case. In a way, greed and aversion in a Buddhist context, we think of greed and aversion, those motive forces in our hearts, as really what animates our life, and then therefore what animates the world, or the human world. Greed and aversion. Gil Fronsdal says it's the caffeine of the soul, greed and aversion. And there's really some truth to that, like when we want to actually develop that kind of way of perceiving, when we look out, observe ourselves, observe others, observe the wider world, we want to see, this is just the activity of greed. This is the activity of fear and aversion, hate, mistrust. All the greed has all kinds of flavors, manifestations, same with aversion, from the sort of outright hatred and violence to all the more seemingly subtle or maybe insignificant but not really forms of aversion, and ways we close down, ways we push away. I thought I'd begin with this story. I used to use this a lot. I forget where I even heard it first, but it's just kind of a made-up teaching story about a farmer going to see the Buddha. And because the Buddha was far away, he had to travel far, and wasn't easy to get to the place where the Buddha was, but eventually tracked down the Buddha and found a time to ask a question. And the farmer just kind of went into this litany of all their problems. Being a farmer, having farm animals, having to deal with the unpredictability of the weather, and even his kids not always doing their chores, and and on and on, the neighbors doing this and that to his property. He just listed a bunch of problems. And the Buddha said, well, you know what? Everybody's got a bunch of problems. And even if I had some advice for one of your particular problems, you'd probably just end up with another one. And obviously the farmer got pretty frustrated and stomped away. And before he was out of earshot, the Buddha said, well, I can't help you with your 84 problems, or your 83 problems, or something like that. But I can help you with your 84th problem. And the farmer was stopped and said, okay, I'll give this guy one more chance. Turns around and says, okay, what? What is my 84th problem, and how can you help me with that? And the Buddha said, well, your 84th problem is you don't like having 83 problems. And that's kind of a good way to begin a look at this way our mind relates to vulnerability and insecurity and the wildness and meanness and hopefully in moments beauty and goodness of the world that we inhabit, the experiences that we sense. And we live in a world, where really anything can happen. And the one thing we know with certainty is that we don't know how it's going to unfold. I mean, we might have some sense, probabilities, but we're not reading all of that, all of what is in play. So, vulnerability or insecurity isn't a mistake. Reb Anderson, a well-known Zen teacher, said once, ordinary people are vulnerable some of the time, but people who practice well, they're vulnerable all the time. Because they're more honest and clear about this truth of uncertainty and vulnerability and insecurity, and that anything can happen anytime, and that not only are the things we think of as being external unreliable and ungovernable, but even our own mind and body is unreliable and ungovernable, right? And if you don't know that, then we're all just set up for a betrayal when we find that out. I like this about the Buddhist cosmology. I don't know if you know this, but there are all these different realms of existence, from hell realms to very refined angelic celestial realms. And one of the characteristics of celestial realms is that as soon as a being is born into one of those very refined, beautiful realms, they don't have to go through the messiness of being a youth that doesn't know how to walk and doesn't know how to speak, or, those sort of things that, in a grand sense, are humiliating. They're born and immediately they're sort of in the full bloom of, being a 19-year-old in human years. Fully manifested, healthy, radiant. And of course, in those more refined realms, as the story goes at least, their bodies are bodies of energy. They're not gross like our bodies that have to eat and poop. In any case, they live in that state of full bloom for eons and eons and eons, some of the more refined angelic realms, evidently. And but when the karma, when that life comes to an end, it happens very quickly. They don't have that sort of long period of aging, old age, illness, and death. They're just like doing great for incalculable amounts of time until it ends, suddenly. And what a betrayal that must be. How confusing to the mind of a celestial being. Because that delusion that this has been happening, it's been so nice for so long, it's never going to change, right? That delusion would creep in. And then when it changes, it would be like, and this is, whether this is represents some subtle level of reality or not, who knows? But it's, in any case, a really good story, a really good metaphor, because sometimes, hopefully, we have a really good go of it. And conditions in our lives are kind of nice, our health is good, we're treated fairly, the weather's nice, the pet behaves, until it doesn't, until things change and we get sick, or we lose our job, or a relationship falls apart, or the world around us falls apart, and our formerly pleasant place we live becomes a war zone, or becomes divisive, where people mistrust each other and even hate each other. And the reason we actually need, to some degree, we need this exposure to what is unreliable, ungovernable, uncertain, and even difficult. Because in a way, the awakening process, the spiritual process of moving from being bound up to being unbound, it involves opening to our lives, any moment will do, and realizing to whatever degree in that moment my heart is resistant, my heart is bound up, my heart is afraid, my heart is wanting things to be different. But in one way or another, having a more honest, clear, intimate relationship to being bound, and then in that stability, in that curiosity, realizing the heart that isn't afraid to feel, to know that experience of being bound up. The Buddha teaches that the cause of being bound up is our current inability to be interested and intimate with the experience of being bound up, of suffering. If we want release from the experience of suffering, which the Buddhist teachings point the way, right? This is the promise from the teachings of the Buddha. There is an end to suffering. There is an end to stress. There is an end to the existential squeeze in our hearts, even when politics are the way that they are, even with the dynamic of climate change and the seemingly inability for the humans to get organized to address it in a clear, direct, impactful way, to get on the same page. Let alone there's so many other problems like the inequities in our societies and the ways that not just humans but other creatures are being mistreated. It just seems that almost like we need to fix this stuff first before we do our spiritual practice. And I think what the Buddha might say is, no, it's actually our lives as they are. We need that exposure. Now, if it obviously can be too much at times, and just like it can be too little at times, like things get too comfortable and our minds get complacent, well, why do I need a spiritual life? Or why do I need to care about anything? I'm doing pretty well, and my life is fun, or interesting, and engaging, and pleasant, mostly. And I can handle it. And when we have that more fortunate situation, we always, the kind of egoic and chronic tendency is to think we deserve it. It's like our privilege is something that I've earned. Even if we know we didn't earn it, like our privilege got passed down from our parents or something like that, there's some strange way our mind makes sense of it, like, yeah, but I still deserve it. It's my karma, that I must have done something good because I got good situation. So it's not that the Buddha would say, well, don't try to make your conditions better. Don't put a sweater on when you're cold, or don't eat food when you're hungry, or don't find a place to live when you don't have a place to live, or don't find a way to earn a living when you don't have a way to earn a living. No. He says just the opposite. You want to develop competence in the world so that we all can modulate this exposure. But we don't want to double down on competence, because in the end it's not going to save us. The Buddha says in the end what saves us, what resolves the issue of suffering, is understanding suffering. So with enough stability and enough comfort, we read the news and we realize what's going on around us. Or we become an activist, and we volunteer here. We go volunteer at a animal shelter, or we take care of people who are less fortunate than us. Just heard an article about these mobile clinics going out to serve the medical needs of homeless people. Just the way that people respond. And just to feel the joy of being of service, but also to find that edge where whatever comfort we have, what's exposed is I'm not that different than these other vulnerable people. Like I might be comfortable, but whatever illness they have, I'm also vulnerable to that. Or whatever financial insecurity or poverty they're experiencing, I'm not immune to that either. So that we're interested in, well, what heart, what understanding knows how to be open and undefended and unafraid and relaxed no matter the conditions. Right? So we use that. This is like in a really simple example. I mean, it doesn't feel simple when we're in the middle of it, but if we, in our meditation period, if we sit longer than we're comfortable, normally we sit for, let's say, 25 minutes, and then, one day a week, which is not a bad idea, you try to extend your sitting. You sit at least 25 minutes, your regular time, but then you just keep sitting. You arrange your life so you can do this. And you just keep sitting till you get to the place where you really don't want to sit, and you keep sitting. Whether it's because of physical discomfort, or because you're extremely bored, or because there are mental states you're not finding pleasant, worries come up, or get the EBGBs, or whatever it is, you really want to bolt, you really want the sit to be over, and you practice, right? Because maybe you don't have a lot of financial insecurity, or maybe you're not going through a divorce, or maybe you don't live in a war zone, or not exposing yourself. Well, then you can just go on a Buddhist retreat or sit for a long time. And it won't be long, before you start to face what's really difficult to face. You don't have to wear a hair shirt. You just have to sit still for a while before it becomes really, really unpleasant. And if you're sitting appropriately, it's not going to kill you, and you sit in a way where you're not going to do permanent damage to your body. So it's not about like willfully causing harm to your body. It's just using what comes up in your life, or finding ways to realize the heart, the understanding that isn't afraid of conditions, circumstances, isn't afraid of the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, as it's said in some of the Buddhist traditions. And we have to do this work for ourselves. So, it can sound a little, superficial or even new agey to say that, embrace the difficulties in our lives, or embrace the chaos in our world, or embrace the divisiveness of our political scene these days. But it's not meant to be sentimental in any way. It's really a pragmatic acting out of what we're finding is a true refuge. So the Buddha says, the Buddhist path is a wisdom path. He's saying that the true refuge, what is really going to provide this release that the heart seeks, the release from being burdened, from being tight with fear, tight with needing things to be different. What's really going to provide that release is a transformation of understanding this. So what is it that we, our normal response to difficulty, and it's really our response to what is hard to bear that distorts our whole way of the way we relate to life. In the Buddha's discourse on the second dart, the second arrow, it's sometimes translated as. A lot of you have heard me talk about it, or read, studied it, or heard other people talk about it. It's a very important discourse. And the Buddha is talking about how our whole way of relating to our experience gets off. And we get caught in these cycles of samsara, these feedback systems where we're relating to the moment in ways that set in motion stress. We're relating to the stress in our lives in ways that lead to more stress in our lives. So we're always feeding the same thing, the same problem, the same way of relating that's stressful, that is a burden on our hearts. And in that discourse, the Buddha says, because we don't know how to be with what's difficult, our relationship to what's pleasant gets distorted. Because it's the only way we know to deal with the difficulty, the uncertainty, the pain, the emotional pain, the fragility of life, is to absorb into pleasant experience. When the going gets tough, right, we seek out pleasant experience. We promise ourselves pleasant experience. And then that distorts our relationship with pleasant experience. All of a sudden, pleasant experience becomes a kind of savior. Like we have this idea of my pleasant retirement is going to save me, or my getting to Friday and I have my weekend is going to save me, or getting to the end of the sit when I can move my body again is going to save me, or when I get to eat again, is going to make this painful work I'm doing worth it, because I'm going to eventually get to have lunch, or I'll eventually get to check my email. I mean, even something like that, it's like, well, at least that will be interesting, it will be juicy. Check my social media, check the news. All these little and big carrots we dangle in front, all of which is stressful. And because of this distorted relationship with what's pleasant, what we sense as being pleasant, we have a distorted relationship to what's neutral. And of course, most of our experience is neutral. It's neither strongly, clearly pleasant nor unpleasant. And that relationship with neutral is that we ignore it because it's not our savior. Pleasant experiences are savior from not knowing what to do with the vulnerability to unpleasant. So we have all aspects of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, is off. And it has this feedback mechanism, it just kind of builds on itself. And we end up in conflict, we end up fighting with each other, we end up freezing, running away with distraction. And because on some level, semi-conscious level, we know it's our way of being in the world, we know it's not working. This is why we're drawn to spiritual practice of one kind or another. We're looking for answers, right? Some of us at least. Like, does anybody know a way? And so it makes us vulnerable to people who tell us they know the way. One of the things for me that was so trustworthy with this early Buddhist tradition is there is such an emphasis on becoming independent. We have to do this work ourselves. We have to find the way ourselves. I mean, it's really helpful to get instructions, to have wise people who are, at least a few steps ahead of us in terms of paying attention to their life and have learned a thing or two that we're not yet ready, haven't yet learned, but they can't do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. And as I mentioned, we need enough safety, enough comfort to be interested in the squeeze and the heaviness and the burdensomeness, in the setup of existence, that life as a human being is a setup. Having a body with birth, aging, sickness, and death is a setup. Having to earn a living one way or another is a setup. Being a social being, needing to navigate the social world, everything from our intimate relationships, the friendships, the family stuff, it's a setup. dealing with the power, status, and all the sort of differentials around status and power and all of our different relationships is a setup. Trying to communicate is a setup, because we can't really do it. I mean, we still need to do it. Giving up on any of this stuff, relationships, earning a living, having a body, doesn't work either. And so we have to have an honest relationship, but to have that honest relationship with the sort of existential setup that being human is, maybe being any kind of living being is, but for sure we know the experience of being a human, and we know it's a setup. We're not actually going to be interested in the setup if we're not relatively safe and comfortable. This is why in Buddhist practice there's such an emphasis on generosity, sila, developing moral integrity or harmonizing in our relationship, developing ethical conduct, and developing samadhi. Because these three ways, these three practices, or these three aspects of our lives, besides being onward leading, supporting the deepening of insight that's actually liberating, they directly and immediately make us more comfortable and safe in life. And if you don't believe this, or if you don't know this directly in your own life, please check it out. Just in little ways, start little, so you really build your confidence. In little ways, start acting on your generous impulses. Whenever you have a generous impulse that feels doable, do it. Say something nice to another person when you have the impulse to say something nice and appropriate to another person. Give something when you have an impulse to give. And just start noticing what that sets in motion in your own experience, in your own heart. Do you feel more comfortable and safe in the world, in your experience? And when you notice that you're doing the opposite and you're being stingy and greedy, just notice what that sets in motion. Do you feel more safe and comfortable in your life, in your world, in your experience, in your relationships? And then just resolve to follow whatever your experiences teaches you. Like, I don't know the way to happiness, but I resolve to do whatever life teaches me. Like cause and effect, I'm going to follow it. And the same thing with like really valuing non-harming, getting interested in not causing harm to myself and others, and not presuming it's like one or the other. Like that somehow keep open that valuing not harming myself and not harming others, actually that doesn't contradict. They don't contradict each other. I can navigate my life valuing not harming myself and others. And what is that sensitivity, that ethical sensitivity, set in motion in a very direct, real way? Not like later when I do it for 20 years, but actually so whenever we have that moral sensitivity, oh, this might cause harm, we hesitate, we pause. Okay, what can I do here to avoid the possibility of causing myself or others harm? Or maybe I won't rush, maybe I'll slow down a little bit. Or maybe won't say what this impulse, I have this impulse to speak, maybe I'll just pause and listen a little longer to what this person is saying. Oh yeah, I'm so glad I listened a little longer, because what I was about to say earlier, that would not have been appropriate. I thought they were saying something, but they weren't. They were really coming from a different place. I'm so glad I paused. I'm so glad I didn't want to take the chance of causing myself and them harm, that I refrained a little bit, paused, until there was more clarity about how to think, how to speak, how to act. and see if that makes us feel safer and more comfortable. And then the same thing with samadhi, like learning how to gather the energy of the mind, how to put down the world that's, the world of experience that is stirring up the heart. And really the place of samadhi is really all about knowing that it matters what we pay attention to. It really matters. So like when we return to the breath, when we're doing a formal meditation, or we're just returning to the present moment when we're out in our job or doing our life, and we just sort of drop in and we notice, oh yeah, there's a body here, and it feels like this, and we have a couple moments of being present. It's like so protecting that gathering, because it feels good, that relative calm, that relative stability of present moment awareness. It feels whole. We feel whole or full. And so any force in the mind, any habit in the mind that is divisive is going to stand up. Like if there's some ill will, some irritation or anger happening, if we just have a moment or two of collecting the energy of the heart, just gathering, just being present, taking a breath. We're still there, talking, we're not looking weird or anything, but we're just sort of dropping into the experience of the body is one of the common things we do. And we train that way so it becomes easy just to have a whole, full, undivided moment of being with the body, with the breath, with hearing. And then that sensitivity, that wholeness, will reveal the ill will that might be present in that moment. Oh, look at that. So glad to see that my attitude is really off in this way. Because if we have just ongoing ill will or irritation or judgment, critical mind, whatever, we don't notice it because it's sort of already the background of the mind. So the next moment of judging, the next moment of some hateful thought, some divisive attitude is not going to stand out when that's been the sort of general flavor of the mind for a couple minutes. But if we have a moment of actual calm, actual peace, actual that wholeness of the mind, heart, not divided by ill will, then whatever ill will then arises in the next moment is going to be seen with more clarity. And in that way, it's so protecting. And that's how we learn how to be with the world that we live in, with the internal storms, our own storms of greed and hate and fear that move within our own space, and then in our communities and our families and our wider world that we're of course part of. And the inner, it's just our inner space that's being reflected out in the outer world. Where else, these terrible conflicts, unworkable conflicts like in the Middle East or in Ukraine or so many other places on the planet, they're just outward expressions of internal minds, the kind of qualities that are moving in minds. We think, that they're separate, but they're really just the inner world reflects the outer, and the outer world reflects the inner. That's why spiritual practice is a radical intervention, not just for the quality of our own heart, but for the world. The world wouldn't be the way it is if there weren't hearts that are sort of reflecting the way the world is. Someone reported that the Dalai Lama was asked a question at the end of a talk, why didn't you fight back against the Chinese? And the Dalai Lama answered, well, war is obsolete, And then a few minutes later, or moments later, his face grave, he said, of course the mind can rationalize fighting back, but the heart would never understand. Then you would be divided in yourself, the heart and mind, and the war would be inside you. And this is the thing about, like, when we read the news, when we expose ourselves to kind of the ignorance in our own life and the world around us, the people around us, the hate, the greed in ourselves and in others. When we relate unwisely to those animating forces of greed, hatred, and delusion, well, then we become part of the problem, because then the war continues, the conflict, the divisiveness continues within our own hearts. As that saying goes, we don't solve the problem. We can't solve the problem, within the context of the problem. We need somehow to step out of that box. We have to see the problem with new eyes. That's the key. This is a beautiful little teaching from Ajahn Sushito. Some of you know him. He's one of our most potent Dharma teachers in our early Buddhist lineage these days. He's been a monk for, I think, now more than 40 years. A British man who was the abbot of a monastery in England for a number of years, Chithurst. But now he's just sort of roaming around teaching. Many of his books and talks are freely available online. Sucitto, Sucitto. And this is just a little teaching about how we work with what feels unworkable. He says, or wrote, what intention can you offer as dana, offer in a generous way to the unpleasant feeling? Right? So there's an unpleasant feeling we're feeling, and the question is, this is the first step. So you notice, your relationship to some news item, something happening in the world, something happening in your family, something happening in your body, like an illness. Oh, this hurts. This is unpleasant. And then he's teaching us, our first impulse should be, what would be a generous way I can be relating to this? How can I relate to this with generosity? And then he gives an example, like a phrase, some phrases we could even repeat, or come up with our own version. Let me not fight you anymore. Right? So we see something that's bothering us, whatever it is. Somebody with their dog left poop on the sidewalk, and it just triggers us, this sort of rageful, because it's like drop by drop. We've been feeding this monster that the neighbors don't care. Nobody cares. Nobody's taking care. Only I care, and I'm tired of it. And one more thing, it's sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we freak out. Right? And then we realize, hopefully, there's a realization, oh, I'm really freaking out, and it really hurts. And I'm not good for my own well-being or for anybody's well-being. And then we can ask, we can say to ourselves, I don't know much, but I don't want to fight this anymore. I don't want to be in conflict with anything. I really want the war to stop. Let me refrain from hating you, from hating this. Let me just see if there's a way to be here that isn't hating. And this practice we have to be awake, to be aware, to be open, is the practice of non-hate. Don't feel like you've got to go right to metta, loving kindness. Okay, No. Real metta is the absence of hate. And being present, the willingness to feel what we're feeling, to see what we're seeing, to sense what we're sensing, is a moment free of ill will, free of hate. And he says, let me refrain from pushing you out of my life, from pushing you out of my heart. Or another way you might say this is like, to the experience that we hate, you belong. This terrible chaos whatever you point to, the Middle East, Ukraine, our political system, the inequities in our society, you belong. It's like so radical to say that, right? Because we want to say, you do not belong. But that's a bit of an arrogant affront. How do we know that? It doesn't mean it's just, and it doesn't mean that it's fair. It just means sometimes it's like this. People are really mistreated. There's real injustice. People are killed unfairly. Not that there's a way to be killed fairly. You belong. You see how radical that is? You belong. Imagine some political leaders that push your buttons and saying, you belong. You belong. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of a world in which things like this happen. Like to our cancer, or to our illness, or to the ambiguity in an important relationship, like, do they still want to live with me or not? And that kind of confusion. Or can I live with this person? How earth-shaking that confusion can be when a long-term relationship is having trouble. You belong. I don't want to fight you anymore. I don't want to throw you out of my heart anymore. I don't want to presume I can't feel what this feels like. Now, I maybe not there yet, but I really want to move in that direction where I don't have to throw you out of my heart. How can I find the necessary safety, comfort, so I can learn not to be afraid of a world that's sometimes like this? That I can really relax and nimbly respond. So I want to leave it here so that we have some time to chat. And I'm going to pick this up again on Sunday, and I'll record that as well. But I'd like to hear from some folks, like your own learnings. Obviously, as human beings, we have had some difficult spells in our lives, real challenges. And some of them have been the kind of things that we didn't expect to be so challenging. And there it was, kind of really challenging our life, breaking our hearts open. And how have we found, what has been our way to include, to get close, to not be afraid that, oh yeah, this is how it is sometimes. Yeah, and questions too, of course. So feel free to just unmute yourself if you'd like to share. It's nice to say your first name, maybe where you're from, share your pronouns if you'd like. Anybody feel like getting us started? Yeah, Deborah. Deborah, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Deborah. I'm from San Francisco. I actually discovered Mark during COVID. And so what I was thinking was life is difficult and presents us with a lot of difficulties and good stuff too. But so why would we intentionally, like the one thing you said about, sit a little longer till you're uncomfortable, or sit a little longer till you're bored. Why would we intentionally inflict discomfort on ourselves when there's enough of it just happening naturally that we can learn from when it happens naturally in our lives?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do you have any intuition about why you might want to do that? Before I kind of give my answer?
No, because not really. I'm thinking I've learned from the difficulties that have been presented in my life. Yeah.
But one of the things we want to do is we want to create optimal, better conditions for that learning that we have learned spontaneously when challenges have arisen. Because you know how it is, like When challenges arises when we're already in our back foot, we don't really learn much. We tend to act out to the next difficulty in ways that reinforce unskillful ways of relating to difficult experience. And when we think about those places where there has been deep learning, it's where there's been a lot of support to be with the difficulty in our life. So when we sit, or when we, do in other ways, build networks of safety in our lives, good friendships, wise friends. I mean, this is one of the things the Buddha praises a lot. We'll learn a lot more from the natural difficulties in our life when we're surrounded by wise friends. And we'll learn all the wrong things when difficulties arise for us when we're around unwise friends. Because our unwise friends are going to say, you should beat that person up. Did you see how they insulted you? Let's get even. Right? They're going to give us the wrong kind of advice. So when we're sitting, or any other ways we undertake spiritual practice, we're not looking for difficulty so much as we want to create supportive conditions in our life to learn the lesson that responding with ill will to what's difficult isn't for my well-being or for anybody's well-being. It may be understandable given the way my mind's conditioned, but it doesn't help. Hatred doesn't lead to anything but more hatred. The grip of hatred leads to the grip of hatred. It doesn't resolve problems. So we get to practice that, like when we create a context like our daily sitting practice, we see how angry we can be, how we see all of the impulses to ill will towards the discomfort or to the boredom. But we get to see it without getting identified with it. Oh yeah, this isn't helpful. And we relate to the ill will with kindness and interest and awareness, right? Mm-hmm. And we learn the way, we build our confidence. So then when things are more hairy and, out in the world and we have fewer supports, we've got some momentum, some confidence.
Mm. Maybe because I've been practicing for a long time, I sort of already, I do that to some extent. So maybe that's, Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. And it's the same with like going on a retreat, where you put aside some of your comfort because you're not choosing what you get to eat and you're not really socializing. So you have that triggers a lot in us when you're practicing what we call noble silence. Most of our retreats are silent retreats. And, you're away from your loved ones and your comfortable beds and all of that. And it's like, why would I do that? Well, because a lot of those things we use to bring comfort and safety aren't as reliable as we imagine they are. And so when we purposefully step away from them, we learn that there's a well-being and a freedom that isn't dependent on those things. And that's very empowering. It doesn't mean we won't go back to our comfortable beds. It just means there's less dependence on it, or this unconscious fear of losing it. Yeah, thanks, Deborah. We have time for at least one more comment or reflection from someone in the group. What comes to mind?
Oh, I'm Meg. I'm about 40 miles south of Common Ground in near Northfield. And what I'm kind of struggling with is, well, I'll just quote Mark. You said, "Let me refrain from pushing you out of my life." Pushing away what makes us uncomfortable or feeling ill will toward that. And I think what I am trying to do is not push myself out of push myself away. I mean, that's a way of not resisting what is hard to bear, to not deny, push myself away or my feelings away or whatever. And I just think it's so important to have you were talking about confidence in the self. I'm thinking about confidence in myself to have boundaries when I need to have boundaries,
Yeah.
and keep myself safe by not pushing myself away. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that, that not pushing anything out of the heart, what
Mm-hmm.
that means is that it doesn't, don't misinterpret that as like, because sometimes like the rattlesnakes, we need to push away, or we need to walk away from those toxic relationships, right? And even within my own heart, if there's a pattern of self-hate, I need to say, no, 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 I'm not doing that. That's not okay. So that sort of non, like love can manifest in different ways, or non-ill will. But what we're not doing is thinking that like ill will is really saying like it's reinforcing the belief that there isn't a understanding, there isn't a wisdom and love that can say yes when the moment is already this way. So if I catch my mind having a lot of self-doubt, a lot of feelings of unworthiness, then what the practice would be like, I don't need to be afraid of this. Doesn't mean I'm going to reinforce it. Doesn't mean that I don't see it clearly. This is not a helpful attitude. But right now it's here. It feels like this. And I'm not going to bury you. I want to see you. I want to realize that I can be with you so that I know how not to feed you. We don't learn how not to feed negative patterns without seeing them clearly. So non-aversion is really related, this not throwing something out of our heart is really how we learn how to take care of ourselves, in exactly the way you were talking about, Meg. It doesn't mean it's easy, and that's why we need enough safety and comfort supports, because it can be quite skillful to realize and say to ourselves, like, I just don't have the capacity to turn toward what's moving in my heart right now. I need some strategic denial. So what can I pay attention to? What can I turn my attention to so that I'm not going to just act this out? So sometimes turning away is the way we take care of ourselves. But even when we turn away, we know, I'm going to get to know you someday. But when I have the proper safety, support, confidence, that I can actually feel what this feels like, but not today. Today it seems overwhelming. But we always want to be on the edge, like, is it overwhelming? Let me just rest for a moment. Let me just open for a moment. I can always open my eyes, I can always stand up, I can always call my friend, we have ways to absorb into other things that will create some space for ourselves. But don't presume that there isn't the wisdom and love that can meet this. Oh yeah, it feels like this. That vastness can hold these storms. We just don't, with our current belief system, believe that. But we have to play the edge a little. Of course, there's so much more to say about all of this, but our time is up. Thanks for the comments, the two of you, and really appreciate people showing up. There's a day-long retreat this coming Saturday if anybody wants to join in person and online. And then next Saturday, Gabe Keller-Flores and I will be leading a half day on the 2nd, 1 to 5 in the afternoon Central Time. On Sunday the 3rd, we have our annual Day of Remembrance. Patrice Kelsch and Kyoko Karayama, two of our longtime teachers at the center, have been doing this for years, just a way to honor people who have passed, even someone who's died, someone you loved 10, 20 years ago. So join in. It's both, I think, on Zoom and in person at the center. You can find more information on the calendar for November 3rd. And I put into the chat resources and some articles related to this topic tonight, so feel free to open up that document before I close the Zoom. Thanks everyone for coming. Feel free to say goodnight if you want.